Rhoda, a biography, Comrade Kadalie, You Are Out of Order, is one of the latest biographies to hit the bookshelves. It's written by South African-born writer and attorney living in California, Joel Pollak. This first authorized biography tells the story of Rhoda Kadalie's life in the context of the country's dramatic changes by tapping into unique primary sources to explore her lifelong commitment to robust debate and political diversity. Joel Pollak joins me now via Zoom to help us dissect this book further. Joel, a very good morning. Thank you so much for joining us. Welcome.
It's great to be with you.
Absolutely. Now, what would you say propelled you to write this story?
Well, Rhoda lived an extraordinary life, growing up in District 6, experiencing the forced removals from Mowbray and Cape Town, and then becoming in the anti-apartheid movement one of the most important feminist voices. And then, of course, moving on to the Human Rights Commission under Nelson Mandela, starting the Impumelelo Awards Trust, and becoming one of the country's most important opinion columnists. So she had an extraordinary life, and she and I had spoken about writing a biography for many years. But then when she was diagnosed with cancer in September 2021, it became a very urgent project. So we worked very hard to make sure that we finished it, and she and I sat every afternoon for many weeks discussing her life, going through her files, her letters, her speeches, various activities that she had done. And it was a labor of love for me. And unfortunately, she passed away last April, but this is her enduring legacy.
Now, let's talk about the amount of research that went into putting this book together.
Well, I had to do a great deal of research, including interviews of people who knew Rhoda and who were willing to talk about her life in various moments. I also did some archival work, including with the Nelson Mandela Foundation in Johannesburg, with the Helen Suzman Archive at Wits University, also in Johannesburg. I even wrote to the German military archives because I was looking into information in her former husband's family background as well. That's an important part of the book also. So it was a real important and wide-ranging task, actually, to try to document all of this. And then there were files. There were boxes and boxes of files from Rhoda's entire life. She brought many of them with her to the United States when she resettled here in the last few years of her life. But there were also files from her mother, who had passed away several years ago and left letters and documents behind. There were family photographs. So there was a real treasure trove of information. And some of it had never been published before. Rhoda kept many files, for example, on the early years of the Gender Equity Unit at the University of the Western Cape, which was a pioneering effort in fighting for equal rights for women on university campuses. And those files were hidden deep within a storage container that I only discovered just a few months before the deadline for publication. So it involved an incredible amount of research into archival material, into personal letters. And in that sense, it was a real scholarly project, not just a story about someone who I loved very dearly as a member of my family, but also it was an investigation into key documents during the period of South Africa's transition from apartheid to democracy, and then in the years following, as that democracy became more and more mature and opposition developed and criticism and so forth. So it was historical work as well as biographical work, and I think that's why it's important for South Africans, because it's an important historical look at the period of transition and of Rhoda's life, which extended from the very darkest days of apartheid to the current day of democracy.
It really is a rich history there, isn't it? And while in the process of conducting research, what would you say are some of the most interesting things you discovered about Rhoda Kadalie?
Well, there were several very interesting points that I bring out in the book. One is that when she was studying overseas in Europe, in Holland, she was actually followed by the ANC in exile, by the underground movement, because they were very suspicious and very paranoid about anybody who lived a little bit differently. So there was a moment of confrontation, actually, when she had to face the liberation movement in exile. And of course, she was perfectly innocent of any sort of reason for suspicion. And it was quite a shock to her that anybody would suspect her of anything. But that's written about in the book. And I think that actually changed her relationship over her lifetime with the ANC. She became much more skeptical of the movement, even though she remained a member. There is another moment in 2004 when the leadership of the Democratic Alliance actually approached Rhoda, who was by then a leading figure in criticizing the ANC government. They approached her and asked her if she was interested in leading the DA. Now, she actually turned down that request because she felt that she was not really cut out for politics. She loved writing about politics. She had a lot of political opinions.
Yeah.
She had friends with political views on every side of the political spectrum. But she herself did not feel that she wanted to be a political leader. She wanted to maintain her independence as a writer, and so she turned down the request. But those are interesting episodes that Rhoda described, and I think they're important for understanding both the government and the opposition in South Africa.
And you've described her as a feminist, as somebody who was very passionate about, politics and social justice. But what is that one thing you'd like readers of this book to know about Rhoda Kadalie?
Well, Rhoda took a variety of political positions over the years, and during her time in the anti-apartheid struggle, she was very much on the left. In the post-apartheid era, she was very much on the side of the liberals, you could say, in defending the Constitution, although she didn't apply that label to herself. And later on, she became a supporter of President Donald Trump in the United States. You could say that that was a conservative viewpoint, but at every stage of her life, Rhoda felt she was fighting for freedom. So freedom in the apartheid era in South Africa meant overthrowing the government. Freedom in the post-apartheid era meant standing up for the Constitution, and freedom in the United States meant standing up against a corrupt political elite, and she saw Trump as someone who would sweep away that corruption and deal with the political insiders who dominate American politics. But at every stage, Rhoda believed in freedom. So no matter what side she was on, left, right, or middle, the guiding principle in her life was freedom, and she valued debate and dissent. She was outspoken, she was critical, but she liked other people to be the same. She didn't need everybody to agree. So even if you disagreed with Rhoda's views, she would encourage that debate. And I think that's an important lesson, not just for South Africans, that's an important lesson for people in the United States and around the world as well.
And this book was launched in South Africa about 2 weeks ago, right? So how did it go, and how was it received?
Well, I have to commend UJ Press. They've done a fantastic job with this book, both in the publication and in the launches. We had a launch event at Exclusive Books in Johannesburg, which was full. They filled up every seat in the store. We had another 2 launch events in Cape Town, also at Exclusive Books and at the Jacob Gitlin Library. And we had dozens and dozens of people. In fact, at the second event at Exclusive Books in Cape Town at Canal Walk, they had to add chairs, and there was standing room only in the back. So there's clearly a strong interest in this book in South Africa. And there's also an interest in the United States as well. I've been on radio programs here in the United States and television talking about this book. There are lessons in Rhoda's life that can apply to any context, not just South Africa, where of course her life is interesting, but also to the United States, where we ourselves are struggling with some of the difficult questions about how to conduct ourselves as citizens in a democracy. And Rhoda really valued choice. She believed that if citizens, if voters had a choice, whether it was socialism on the left or nationalism on the right, as long as voters had a choice, they could hold politicians accountable. That's an important and urgent topic here in the United States as well as in South Africa.
All right, Joel, great chatting to you. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm still drawn by the title, Comrade Kadalie, You're Out of Order. Just briefly, what really inspired that?
That was Rhoda's idea. That was her idea for the title, because when she was in the anti-apartheid struggle, she was often criticizing the leaders of the struggle, often, for example, for their inattention to women's rights. So she was constantly being told, you're out of order. And she embraced that, and she made it the subtitle of her biography.
Wow, beautiful stuff. Joel, great chatting to you. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. That was writer and attorney Joel Pollak, and we've been discussing his new book titled Rhoda, a biography, Comrade Kadalie, You're Out of Order.